I would actually like to start with Papua New Guinea. Can you give us, I wonder, has anybody here been to Papua New Guinea? Yes, that's amazing. Can you give us just a little bit of information, Simon, about Papua New Guinea? Is it this paradise island? And what also PNG Air does?
Certainly. So PNG Air is the second carrier in Papua New Guinea. We're predominantly a domestic airline, but we also have resource clients that we fly and connect their destinations through to Australia. So Papua New Guinea, there's certainly areas that would qualify as paradise. There's also the challenges of a developing country alongside that. So it's a real mixture. But our services are mainly domestic, and we're able to differentiate ourselves with our service and some of the unique destinations that we fly against compared to our competitor.
Thank you. And what I learned from you yesterday as well is that they speak more than 800 different languages.
Yeah, there's more than 800 languages spoken across the country, which I think is the most in the world. And that's just represents the diversity. So in terms of comparison to Australia, population, about 85% of the population is on the coast, 15% interior. It's the complete reverse in Papua New Guinea. So 15% of the population will live in cities, 85% is spread across the country in villages and tribes.
And you worked most of your life really with a focus on revenue management. Is there a common thread, something you noticed throughout as main challenges, main patterns, similarities between the different markets you worked in and the different systems you used?
Yeah, I think the common threads for me in terms of from a revenue management perspective is whichever market you're in or airline is forecasting is paramount, and and having a view on forecasting and what the view is, and then the diversity of the different markets, it's where to listen to where the differences are and where to challenge as to where good airline management practices need to work alongside the local information. So it's finding that balance.
Thank you, and we'll talk a bit more about this in a second. Paul, let me come to you. I think everyone, when thinking about AirAsia, has in mind this kind of lifestyle brand which AirAsia is aiming to be, and the super app you created. How did you do all of this, and how do you revenue manage this? Can you give us a bit more insight?
Yeah, Ursula, first, thanks for having us. Great to be here. I think, look, where did the super app come from? It was born out of the pandemic, and it was really a necessity for the business to survive. I think, we went from carrying 90 million passengers a year to effectively zero. So the founder, I think everyone knows Tony, really saw the pandemic as an opportunity to expedite, his vision of building a true super app. So I think during the pandemic, we launched ride-hailing. There was food business, loyalty as well, with a lot of focus there. And I think we're now starting to see the results now that the region has opened up, air travel demand is back, and we're really now leveraging the ecosystem in terms of what we do. So I'll give you an example. So a passenger can get on an AirAsia flight now, connect to the Wi-Fi, and book an AirAsia ride, and the car is waiting for them at the airport. So it's really, leveraging the ecosystem, benefiting from a population base in ASEAN of about 800 million people, and really driving home all those synergies together. That really drives not just the ticket revenue, but gives us a huge opportunity to grow our ancillary base as well.
And do you already see trends that people also book without any flight without any travel plans. I think you've got, is it correct, 8 million users in the meantime of the super app?
Yeah, so I mean, we do see a lot of bundle activity at the moment, but we also see, independent, visits on our ride hailing. It's actually very, very successful, despite having quite aggressive competition in Southeast Asia. The Grabs, Grab being the biggest competitor, it is growing exponentially. There's a huge demand for ride hailing in Southeast Asia.
And do you revenue manage the marketplace separately, or do you revenue manage everything together?
So it is a separate function, but in terms of bundling, when we start bundling ride hailing into the ticket price, that's where I would come in on the airline side. But it is managed as a separate revenue management team sitting within the super app. But we generally speak to each other very regularly because we need to have the bundle capability as well. So, but it's managed as a separate business than the airline revenue management.
Would you prefer that it was all in one?
It would sometimes be easier, but I think one day we will get there. It'll eventually come together anyway. Super App is still relatively in its infancy. There's still a lot of learning going on there, so I think it will eventually mature and come under one.
Okay, thank you. Talked about ride hailing. Ride hailing is what you also do, Andrew, with Car Trawler, what you offer. You have as well, I think, 1,700 car rental companies globally. In the meantime, I found some amazing figures. 500 plus mobility suppliers and 500 travel partners in total. Some amazing numbers. How did you get there? How do you do this? What is the secret?
Yeah, I think to follow what Paul said there, like we try and fit into the ecosystem with each of our partners. So some partners will look for car hire, they'll want it end to end, so they want the customer to be able to see it in the booking flow. Others will just want it on their homepage or confirmation page. And then some of our partners want mobility solutions as well, whether that's private transfer or some ride hailing. And it's trying to fit that into the ecosystem of when the traveller is making what are quite complicated choices on their travel arrangements, whether that's the flight, the hotel, the car hire, the mobility piece. And we try to do that in a very seamless way, make it simple for the customer. So if you're on easyjet.com tomorrow, in the booking flow is our content. We present that very dynamically. So depending on where you're traveling and how many people are on the booking, we present that content back to you to optimize both for conversion of that car, but equally then to optimize for the best price for both the supplier who we represent, a Hertz or an Avis, for example, but equally to maximize revenue for the partner. So we present all that back in, all those offers back dynamically within milliseconds, and we're constantly trying to evolve that in revenue managing it on behalf of everybody within that ecosystem.
So did you develop that technology yourself? How did you grow this? Because it's an enormous amount of data that you are using there.
Yeah, there's a bit of our original system is proprietary. There's then levels of models that we've taken in externally. Some have been developed internally. I would call it a package of kind of AI models that we now use to kind of drive that revenue management piece. And because we're consuming so much data, we're presenting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cars every day to passengers. We need to be able to consume and filter and use that data in a smart way without it slowing down the process. Consumers have become more and more demanding. If you're waiting half a second for cars to present, there's a strong potential you'll lose that sale. So we have to present it quickly, accurately, well merchandised at the right price. So yeah, it's great. It's a conundrum that we really enjoy every day, and it challenges us, and that's something that's within our ethos, which is really enjoyable.
And how does the fulfillment work? How do you bring that together from the customer perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways. So we provide content to lots of travel websites, for example. We provide content to airlines, and really it depends on what those partners look for in terms of that fulfillment piece. But ultimately, it can be anything from a prepaid car to a card that you pay at the desk for to a private transfer piece. So the fulfillment is, it's really driven by what the partner looks for. But in some instances, we can combine the payment of the airline ticket and the car into one payment, and the customer doesn't actually know that they're making two payments in real time. So just trying to make it really, really efficient and fluid for the customer.
Sounds super interesting. Alex, Flyer Labs. Can you tell us a bit more about it? You started off with revenue management, but in the meantime, it is actually much, much more.
Yes, so thank you for inviting me in this panel. We started Flyer to try and do revenue management better. And that sounds like it's simple, but it is not. We saw a couple of things across airlines in particular. We saw that airlines struggle to identify and utilize their data. We saw that airlines struggle at forecasting the future. And we saw that airline users or analysts are usually heavily reliant on homegrown tools or Excel spreadsheets to interact with information. So we started building a platform that ingests and manages all commercial data that might be relevant to making a decision, then uses advanced deep learning or AI to take that data and contextually understand how that data correlates in order to come up with the right price or the revenue optimal price. And then we also forecast revenue, we forecast demand, and then that kind of compounded in forecasting no-show rates, cancellation rates, channel mixes. And then on the third piece, we really bring all the data together in a single analytics interface. But as we started working with more and more airlines to help them make better decisions, we realized that the ability of the airline to either display or enable the decision in the form of an experience to the customer is very limited, and their ability to fulfill those more complicated decisions and experiences is equally limited in the legacy reservation system of the airline. So over the last 2 years, we've been heavily investing not just in that data forecasting and analytics platform to help make decisions, but also we bought a company to provide the booking engine to power the airlines. So avianca.com, for example, is running on our booking engine now. And we bought a company that helps us let airlines transition or reduce their dependency on the legacy PSS and reservation system, right? So I think of the legacy PSS as storing information in a flat text PNR record, mostly, for an airline ticket. Whereas if you want to sell ancillary products and bundles and do dynamic pricing and do continuous pricing, that's extremely limiting. And you need a way to more richly store the data. So that's really what we provide airlines. So we provide the decision-making, the experience, and then kind of the fulfillment commerce layer to help airlines detach the front of the house, how they sell, and how they engage with the traveler, from the back of the house, which is kind of how they operate business. That's kind of at a high level I would describe it. And we were fortunate to raise almost $500 million in the last 3 years from major investors to help us kind of achieve that vision and kind of unconstrain and unlock airlines to retail and retail better now, not in 5 or 10 years.
And we'll come back to the machine learning part again later, but just to understand a bit more, how do you manage all of this growth? Do you still sleep?
Oh, I'm on a plane 3 weeks of the month, and I sleep very little. I live outside of the city now just so that I can actually relax the 1 week that I'm at home. But yeah, no, there's a lot going on, but we've been able to build a good team. We hired the CFO of 23andMe, which is the public company, DNA testing. He's now with the company. We hired the former chief revenue officer of Red Hat. We hired the former CMO of Aon, and a bunch of others to kind of help us build up the team so that I can actually sleep.
And you have also or are intending to move into other verticals. I think you've acquired as well hotel technology partner.
So to be clear, our core business is and will be airlines. But to go to the offer point, airlines are going to be changing their business, and I have great respect for what AirAsia is doing, right? Their super app is visionary, not just because it enables more revenue streams than just that seat, but also because they're doing it in a world where they have an airline operating and they have legacy limitations, even as a direct-to-consumer mostly engaging channel. We started investing and looking at hospitality, rental cars, ancillary car transfers, ancillary products outside of the airline's control because we believe they have to be part of the package. And I think where things are headed is we need to be in a position to help airlines establish what that package looks like, price that package, and fulfill that package. And as Paul was already hinting at, that needs to be eventually under one umbrella. So that's what we're building towards. And that's why we're engaging with some of these industries to make sure we can not just help them, but also integrate this content across modalities and across verticals into a single offer and experience platform and fulfill it in a single order and offer management stack.
And is it then possible from the revenue management perspective to revenue manage those different elements of the offer?
Yeah, so I think the term revenue management in the traditional sense will disappear, right? We have airlines today that are asking us, here's our cost data, can you please tell your AI agents to optimize for profitability, not for revenue, because optimizing for revenue is very different from optimizing for profitability. Most airlines will make more money on that seat selection or that meal they sell than on the actual right to fly. And AirAsia will know this better than anyone as a major low-cost carrier, right? So the ability to focus on profit optimization more than revenue optimization, I think, is becoming more and more important. Layer that, doing it across products, some of which are not your own, adds complexity. And this is where AI becomes so important, right? Like, you cannot layer all these things on top of each other, relying on if this, do that, human rules and human analysts behind every single decision. You have to automate more, and you have to let data inform that decision. And there's no better way to do it than kind of deep neural networks or AI to do that at tremendous scale and at tremendous speed.
And so you would have different, you would ultimately be able to manage each element, revenue manage it separately, or have the own
No, in my view, you need to manage the basket of goods, right? The shopping cart, effectively, optimizing for the outcome that is profitability across them. Like, you might want to lose money on the flight component because you'll make a lot more on the other ones, right? So that's kind of where the world is changing towards and what we want to try and optimize for.
Is that what you would be happy about as the airline to be able to do? Because today, if you look at how revenue analysts work, basically they don't really see profitability. And it's called revenue analysts, but they don't really see the revenue because they only see the booking classes. Is that something you think you would want?
If I think from a revenue management perspective, it makes sense. You want to see the total package and optimize the total offering to the customer. You know, I think we heard earlier in some of the forums in terms of airlines are traditionally siloed, and the way sort of e-commerce has evolved, you know, over the periods of times is like you could potentially end up with many optimizations taking place in different silos and coming out with the wrong answer for the company overall, because you don't have that connection and you don't have everybody working together, you know, across different disciplines. So I think bringing those different disciplines together, bringing the single offer together and optimizing it in one makes perfect sense.
Do you revenue manage ancillaries at all today at P&G?
It was, from a P&G perspective, you know, we're not at the forefront, you know, in terms of, I think my key role is keeping an eye on where the industry is going, to keep up to date with what is happening, so that when the time is right for P&G, you know, we can step on board and be successful in joining the ecosystem in terms of that's being developed.
What about you?
Look, I completely support. I mean, the revenue management organization is evolving, not just the technology. So I think from the AirAsia perspective, as Simon mentioned, typically functions were siloed. So what we've done in the last probably 18 months, so we've brought the ancillary revenue management team into the core revenue management team, because as Alex mentioned, it is all for us about the total basket size. So it just wasn't making sense organizationally to have two separate teams. So what we've done is we've restructured. So the team's ultimate objective now is to maximize the basket size, not just focused on the airfare or on the bags on the seat. It's a total revenue target we have in place, and we adapted the organization to reflect that.
And if I can, I want to add one more item to that, and that is, I think this extends beyond just the revenue or profit function, right? Like, if you have better forecasts for your load factors, right, you can start driving a conversation with your scheduling teams to make sure you got capacity in the right places, right? You can up or down gauge, you control your cost. You can tell your marketing team to spend money in places where yields are good but loads are behind, and not waste it in places where loads are high and yields are low. So, like, this integrated function doesn't just relate to the pricing of things, it relates to how you actually commercially plan your business.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have value-add discussions instead of just administering kind of. In car rental, there is a lot of, just to remain for a moment on this ancillary question, in car rental there is increasingly sales of ancillaries. Do you revenue manage those, Andrew?
Yeah, so we obviously there's two types of content we take. We take net and retail rates. We can revenue manage the actual net rate up to a market rate. That's the first thing we do. Second thing we do is, if you think about the challenge with the airlines, is they're just presenting a seat and a price and potentially some bundles. For us, we're presenting hundreds and hundreds of cars. So for us, the revenue management piece is how we sort those in order based on your preference. Half of passengers never change the setting to pricing. They just leave it in the recommended sort. So there's a big opportunity in that piece. I'm one of the 50% who changes it to price, but that's understandable. So that's one piece we do. Then for the ancillary bit, so we sell a lot of further on products such as additional driver, GPS, all those sorts of add-ons. And then the other big piece for us is insurance. So we actually revenue manage the insurance price. It's actually linked to our car pricing algorithms. So we're very much trying to manage that basket, albeit it's a different basket that Paul refers to. I think the other bit to touch on from the previous point is sometimes if you can rely on experts to price the ancillary that they're good at, so for example, car trawler and cars, and we add that into the package where the airline doesn't have to worry about that element of complexity for themselves, and they can focus on their core business. That's one of the big value adds that we bring to the party in that instance.
And to come back to the machine learning part, with this new modern retailing, data gets even more important and data volumes will increase more. How much of this can really be used? How much can be automated? Any views?
Well, so I think there's two types of optimization. There is the macro batch optimization. You ingest all your data and you try and get better at selling a product at kind of a wider audience, and you only segment by point of sale or by point of commencement or by channel. And then there is the more real-time personalization, right? I know who you are, what your loyalty status is, what you've bought before, right? I know what you're doing in your session. And the former is something where AI and machine learning can deal with huge amounts of data, compute it, store it in the database, and you can do a lookup. I mean, that's pretty common, I would say, in terms of like how to think about revenue management. Where the world is going, however, is more this real-time interaction. I think Cartroller does some of this. Like, we've invested super heavily in being able to respond or run an AI model in less than 30 milliseconds during the session of the user, considering what is going on in that session of that user, in order to optimize what we offer them, how we price things, how we package things. And that's where I think things are headed. So I think machine learning both has the ability to deal with all this new data, storage data, third-party data, right? GDP, market data, whatever it may be. But it also has the ability to make these very complicated but precise decisions in real time. So both streams are enabled by AI. Huge amounts of data on a batch basis and kind of very personalized, specific data very quickly in real time at runtime. So those are enabled by AI. You can't really do that by traditional rules systems because the rules would just clog up the system.
Any further thoughts on this? I think traditionally you would probably say 80% would have been automated. You would go further than 80%?
I won't name names, but typically in a traditional revenue management world, 90 to 95% of all the prices the user ends up buying in air are the result of a rule of sorts set by an analyst in a subjective way. If you look at typically what we do, less than 5% of the actual prices that are purchased were ever touched by an analyst or a rule. So 95% running on autopilot. If you look at our business today, we're managing billions and billions of dollars of other people's revenues on autopilot that were never touched by an analyst. That doesn't mean the analyst isn't important, right? The job of the analyst becomes more about escalate to them the places where your algorithm is failing or where it is unsure, and then give them the tools to make sure that they can figure out what to do about it. And I think Paul might have some thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we invested in new technology during the pandemic, and as Alex says, our team now spends 10% of their time managing flights within 30 days to departure, because we've set up those rules, to trust the model that, we have a schedule on sale 15 months out, and the analysts are not actually looking at those flights, until they get closer into the booking curve, because, we realize the human can just not get around to managing every single flight every day. So these models are set up as such that, typically the revenue management analyst previously is the person that constrains demand. So, we invested in our internal data science capability, and all of the recommendations now, I would say up to about 95% that the output is accepted by the revenue management analyst. So these demand constraints you were seeing previously are pretty much, the shackles are off, so it gives us the confidence the revenue management team is on flights that are in that peak booking curve where they can really optimize for events, for day of week, so their core time is spent there. So I think it will continue to evolve. Booking curves are changing out of the pandemic, so I think there's a lot of work. We want to invest in data science around a lot more granularity around day of week pricing. So but I do think we have moved into a world of where data science, further out, those algorithms are there to be trusted, and the revenue management analyst is really focused closer in on the booking curve. That's what we observe coming out of COVID.
I think the one big human intervention that's always needed is just to keep these models up to date. So, Alex talked about where models fail or they don't optimize. For us, we try and review it regularly because the market is changing so much, so dynamically. After COVID, you can't compare to last year anymore. You can't compare to 2019. And then we know also that different flying patterns and different booking patterns are out there. So we're constantly, that's the big human intervention for us, is people challenging those models, reviewing them, putting new models in place. So that's a huge part of the input.
And on that point, I would say that for every dollar we spend on the actual models and research, we spend about $8 on the infrastructure. So we train our models, but then every single day or multiple times a day, as new data arrives, these models are running new inference jobs. So they're reconsidering the current data. And what's really interesting about deep learning forms of AI, ML, opposed to more traditional linear regression type models, is that deep learning looks at context. Like, what was the impact of my competing airline putting a flight against my flight within half an hour? What did that do to demand? So that the next time you see a similar occurrence, even in a different market, you have a sense of what it will do. So deep learning kind of builds these connections and correlation and understanding and applies it later. And this allows it to actually move really quickly, even if patterns in the market change. Right? There's airlines out there that are still using year-over-year 4, year-over-year 5 references to see if they're doing a good job. That makes zero sense, right? So you need models that are able to adapt on their own, and then you need humans and processes around that to verify whether a retraining or a tweaking of a model is actually going to drive better performance.
So I certainly agree in terms of the focus of analysts should be where they can add value. So that 80-20 rule seems like 90-10 rule. But also I think in terms of as the systems become more sophisticated, the actual skill set of a revenue management analyst has changed over the last 10 years. So that the kind of education and background and knowledge to be able to interact with these systems is very different to what it was 10, 15 years ago. So there's an evolution there in terms of, we talk about analysts, but we also have to train them to work with the new systems.
And what about continuous versus dynamic pricing? Do you see that this is something important you consider? Would you offer personalized prices in your marketplace? Who wants to go first?
I'll take it. So I think for the audience to break things down, there's a few pieces here to break down. The first thing is the vast majority of airlines in the world cannot sell at just any price point. Right? There is such a thing as fair filings, and there's a system in ATPCO where the airline has to file a ladder of prices. And if that filed price has $200, but I want to sell at 190, the customer is still going to see $200. What continuous pricing does versus kind of more traditional pricing is instead of just allocating seats to these predetermined price points, it's traditional revenue management, a continuous price point just says, I should be pricing at $191, right? So that's kind of continuous pricing. That doesn't mean the airline can fulfill it, right? There is still this problem with fare filings. This is where we provide a bunch of ways to actually get past that, but that's a different conversation down the rabbit hole. Then there is dynamic pricing, which there's a few ways to read this, but the way I think of this is the ability to consider something at the point in time or just prior to actually making a decision, right? So continuous pricing is I can price at any point I would like to price. Dynamic pricing is I have the ability to consider things in that consideration, like your loyalty status, or like the channel, right? Or the agent's PCC code, for example. So what we do is we do continuous dynamic pricing. So we can drive a continuous price point that is not limited by those fare filings while considering data that is either very recent or real time.
Do you have a view what adds more value, or is more something that airlines or travel companies should strive for?
You have to go continuous dynamic, right? Like, let's put it this way: if you believe that your models on the overall are doing a better job, right, a good job at determining price, and you're just objectively looking at those models, spitting out price points, saying you should price at $191, but your force is still at 200, there is inherently an inefficiency, right? You're going to lose potential passengers because you're forced to price higher than you want to price, or the inverse could be true as well, right? So inherently there is an inefficiency with that legacy construct, and you have to move to continuous pricing because you close that gap, and you have to move to continuous dynamic pricing in order to personalize and address the need of the customer. So it's gonna have to go there. And one of the things that we heavily invest in, and one of the things that makes certain players in the ecosystem not very happy with us, is the fact that we're investing heavily in breaking those limitations of that legacy construct, that is fare filings and text-based PNRs and traditional forms of distribution, because you have to do those things. You have to break that stronghold.
You will ultimately achieve higher conversion, higher revenues as a result, and that's...
And control of your destiny.
Absolutely. And you cater really for the customer, which somehow on the revenue management side, by just past practices, just looking at historic developments, the customer somehow doesn't really appear in this, and suddenly in this new world the customer is actually really at the center of this. Is that what ultimately, how do you manage to get your teams to, or do you think they should move into this direction and you would want to change to this new world, even the world without booking classes and all of the other possibilities?
I think from managing a revenue management team and a set of analysts, it's always been a challenge to remember, often they're in a head office environment disconnected from the customer. So it's always remembering what the decisions that they're making about their inventory setup, the forecasts, or the pricing, what's the impact on the customer down the road. Whether that's traditional set of fare rules in terms of what are we actually doing to our frontline employees in delivering the product, are we enabling them to successfully meet the customer needs, be able to deal with the flexibility or the changes in their travel patterns. So I think it's just an evolution in terms of, we talked about breaking out of the silos and having a more comprehensive cross-functional teams. We just need to elevate the mindset of the customer and the analyst as they make decisions.
I think there's one unique bit for us in the customer piece that just to add to that is that we're presenting a set of options from various suppliers, for example. But one big factor is what's the CSAT score? So what does the consumer historically say about this product and service? So part of when we sort cars to present to customers is what is the CSAT score? Has it got a good rating? Because that really drives conversion. So we have another tool in our toolkit that basically says actually if it's a higher score, it has a better chance of the customer buying that car. So we have to curate a bit of a customer service story and a very important kind of measurement tool so that customers trust that. But it's a really unique piece for car hire because you're presenting different content, and then we can dynamically sort that based on what we think consumer preferences are. So for certain airline types, in low cost, they'll generally look at a customer rating score that's slightly lower, whereas full service carriers, we will generally present higher scoring cars to them. So it's a bit of a nuance, but it's really focused on the customer and getting that conversion.
What I've seen a lot in the airlines is that with digital becoming stronger and obviously influencing quite significantly with dynamic propositions, your revenue generation and optimization, there were sometimes these silo thinking between the two departments, revenue management and digital, instead of really having the discussion. Now, with moving even further into modern retailing, you come to the point to say, but where does now distribution fit in, revenue management, really moving into the order space, and then there is the digital team. How do you see that moving? I think Lufthansa made quite an interesting move, pulling together, basically realizing actually the whole distribution. It is revenue management and distribution. It is going to be one. Do you see it this way? What are your views about this, and what are your experiences even today?
I mean, from our perspective, we're direct. You know, we're there already. We distribute direct. You know, we don't work with GDSs, travel agents typically. So, you know, for in the world we're in, you know, we are direct, and we don't plan to use GDS. I know Ryanair have moved across from that, and I'm sure there are some benefits, but we are quite clear, the lowest cost, you know, powerful marketing. We can drive everything through our direct channel.
And what happens there then with the pricing, for example? Pricing and revenue management, who determines that in the organization?
I mean, that's determined by the market, really. The market drives the price. You know, I mean, we have all of these competitors in certain markets we're in. I mean, the team is benchmarking their competition, not just on promo fare levels, fare structures. So, I mean, it's the revenue management team that is driving the pricing decisions. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it's the demand that drives the market.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that this gap between pricing and revenue management, which traditionally is actually being done in different teams, will that disappear?
Yeah, I mean, look, I do agree with Alex. I do think we will get to a world where continuous pricing, you know, because, you know, we have the fare class conundrum at the moment. You know, you have the $10 to $20 gap between the fare classes, and, you know, there's no way in reality knowing what is optimal. So I do think that we will get to a world eventually where we will not have fare classes, and that is continuous pricing. That's where I see it's going. Absolutely.
Hopefully. What do you think, Simon?
Yes, I mentioned earlier, it's like breaking down of all of these silos. You know, in terms of it will depend on the size of the airline as to how the teams interact, but you know, they need to act as one and be able to share information and be able to determine how the product is priced. All the way through to distribution. There needs to be harmony across all of these functions. Because as we heard again yesterday, it's like you can excel in different elements, but if you have a weakness in your pipeline to get the offer to the customer, you're going to fail. So it all must connect seamlessly.
And to add to that, like, there's a lot of airlines that have code sharing and interline dependencies on others, right? Like AirAsia is in the very, very nice position to focus on direct, build its business around direct and control that channel, right? I will say, however, that like the way you, like I said earlier, you disconnect the front of the house from the back of the house is by moving to offer and order. Now, that seems like a very vague term, but really, in my view, what that means is you have the ability to store a very rich version of all the customer, the offer, and the order information in one place. Think of it as like a very powerful relational database, right? And then on the other side, you've got that traditional flat text PNR in the reservation system, right? What we are very focused on is enabling that reservation system to still get the information it needs, but have this extremely rich offer, order, and customer records sitting outside of it, so that you can build your experiences and distribution decisions independently right, on top of that stack instead of being limited by the traditional PNR in that reservation system. You still need that for like your departure control systems and operations and load planning and all these things, and that's not going to go away, and we don't play in that space. But the argument that your operation depends on that record in that legacy reservation system is completely independent from the need to rely on that system to create better experiences for the customer and fulfill them and distribute them. And I think that's something that airlines are starting to realize, and we want to be there for airlines of any kind, including those that have legacy limitations, to help them do that faster and unlock that capability. I think it's really important to realize that those two worlds are not inherently locked at the hip. They could be independent, and they could be independent now, not in 5 years.
At BranchSpace, we are a passionate team with deep cross-functional experience in airline and travel tech, travel retail, and end-to-end customer experience. We offer transform consulting services and TripLake, our best-in-class digital commerce platform. With TripLake, we deploy the latest technology and retail thinking and make it easy for you to drive personalized end-to-end experiences for your customers and meet your revenue goals. We are an IATA strategic partner for digital innovation to drive together the future of travel. We have been a long-term trusted partner for LH Group, IAG, AGN, TAP, Air Malta, and more. Visit branchspace.com to learn how we turn the current challenges airlines are facing in the digital world into opportunities.